Dave Ross is active in the film and TV industry. He lives in Brooklyn, currently quarantined in Massachusetts. He first started shooting 3D about 2 years ago and is mostly working with the Stereo Realist and a Revere. He actually develops film, which is wonderful. We had a very good conversation about that. And I'm sure we'll discuss it a little bit more a little later. But it's wonderful to see someone actually going out and developing E6. And we all love digital, but it is quite fun to dip back into old-fashioned film. You'll learn an awful lot by doing that. And I think we're ready to go there, Dave.
Hey everybody, I'm super happy to be presenting my photos today. This is my first round of anaglyphs, so be kind. This first one was taken with the FinePix W3. This is the lobby of my doctor's office, so admiring these chandeliers. You can see in the background, the building was finished in 1915 there. I just love these chandeliers and the whole lobby design, the bare bulbs, and so I took about 1,000 pictures of this.
About how long ago did you take these? When did you shoot
This
them?
was in November, I think.
Did you do anything with them?
No, the colors were all kind of anaglyph safe, so I just left it as is, did a little levels, and I think that Jim Harp made the anaglyph effect work a little better since I sent it in.
Great. Stand by.
This one is just a more detailed shot of the kind of tiered lamp shape, and it's kind of like a stained glass arrangement, Art Deco kind of style. And I just love how there's so many of these buildings just kind of hiding in plain sight all over Manhattan. So I'm lucky enough to just be in this once a month and get to see it.
Where is this building actually?
This is Midtown East, Madison Avenue and 31st, something around there.
There's a lot of interesting buildings around Madison over there.
Yeah, it looks very plain office building from the outside, but the lobby is really beautiful. This is at the Mall of America in Minneapolis, and it's kind of from a distance kind of like an ugly light fixture, but if you look up from straight below, you're looking up at all these kind of crystals being hung by fishing line, and it just kind of made me think of the last shot of Alien, or like when the spaceship is flying off, just backlit special effects kind of look. And yeah, I took this with an iPhone in Cha-Cha.
Cha-Cha with an iPhone. Did you just take 2 shots, or did you take several to get it? Or
this was just 2 shots.
2 shots.
This was taken with the FinePix W3 also. Was experimenting with it in the long shutter mode. It only goes up to a half a second, but I just locked it into half a second and just took a bunch of car pass-bys.
Now, okay, so you locked it in, I guess you were just holding it, or did you have it on something? How did you?
This was handheld. This was handheld.
I'm curious, what did you think you got when you looked at the back of the camera?
The depth is better when it's on a large screen. I think that screen on the W3 is a great little preview to see if any depth came through whatsoever. But it wasn't until I put it like full screen anaglyph that I saw kind of what this could do as far as the headlights. And the next shot is another kind of different handheld version where I tracked the car instead of standing totally still. And I just like the shots where the detail of one thing pops out. So.
And it's wonderful. It's wonderful because we learned during the rehearsal. I accidentally grabbed my glasses quick and just put the red over the right eye instead of the left eye, and check it out. It actually is great.
Right. That's right. I think because all these are kind of just little abstract light spots, they kind of work as foreground elements and background.
Yeah, it really is. It's just a wonderful little happy accident. It's not with the car, I mean, but anyway.
And this is my last shot. This is taken with the Revere 33, which is like a realist style camera. And it's Ektachrome E100. This was taken in Harlem on 145th.
Did you ever shoot with Kodachrome?
No, that was way before my time, unfortunately.
I just like even 2D, but way before you. Now, you know what you did? You just sent a chill down the spine of like 30 people.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff. The Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon, go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Spot and Doug.
America has launched. And so rises the new era of American spaceflight, and with it the ambitions of a new generation continuing the dream. 20 seconds into flight, stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Get back. 3, 2, 1. My next guest is Paul Aaron Johnson, currently lives and works in New York City. He's a 3D lenticular photographer, Emmy Award-winning director of animation, special effects, has worked for Lucas Arts Industrial Light and Magic, and has work on display from every place from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and various galleries and exhibitions in and around New York City and the world. He developed an interesting technique called a 3D shadow graph. Today, rather than drill into, and that's for another time, but today, rather than drill into the technical points of the lenticular process, which is a session in and of itself, he's going to explain his creative process. Hopefully that will inspire you to experiment with lenticulars or just simply be amazed at the creative process of an artist. I suggest that you visit his website and support his creative effort by purchasing his some of his artwork. And now you have officially done the screen grab. Give me one moment while I eliminate myself, because you don't need to see me looking at you, Miss.
Good afternoon, everyone. That is a tough act to follow, and I'll try to do my best. I'm going to talk about the lenticular process and some of the techniques I use. Mostly in this show, we're just going to talk about photographing plants and flowers at botanical gardens and so forth. In the first image you see here that's moving is, like a typical lenticular print. It's the kind of image where you don't need special glasses to view it. It has a lens sheet, which you see on the upper right. That's a side view of what the lens sheet looks like in close up. It shows the lenses, which are semi-cylindrical and usually run vertically for 3D, but you can run them horizontally for flip animation or regular animation images. The reason you would run them horizontally is so that each eye sees the same image, whereas when they run vertically, the whole point is that each eye will see a different image, which you can see by the color diagram below. The right eye sees the right image, and the left eye sees only the left image. This diagram only shows a stereo view, but in most cases, lenticular photography usually has many more than just 2 views. It can be anywhere from 4 to 140, depending on the type of lens sheet you use and the and the printing process. So most of my lenticulars nowadays will have like 30 to 40 or up to 60 views. But when I first started out, I was only doing like 6 views because I didn't know better. Anyway, what I have here, the shooting method that I use, I generally use a, well, you see here in the diagram that says figure 7, it shows that the actual image focuses down to a little point on the back of each lens sheet, which allows you to put multiple views up to 30 or 40 views. And that's the ideal for lenticular, because if you only have 2 views, like in the right diagram, then when you move just a little bit, you're going to immediately switch to pseudoscopic. But when you have like 30 or 40 views, when you get to the end of the sequence, you get a double image as it switched back to the beginning again. So, so you know where the sweet spot is very easily. So that's why most 3D lenticulars have more than 2 views. So one of the shooting methods that I use is to use a slide bar and put the camera on a slide bar in this case, this is a 12-inch slide bar from Jasper Engineering, and it's specially designed with click stops so I can shoot very precise work up close. But there are many slide bars. Some of them are 3 feet. Some of them that I have are 3 feet long, and they don't have clicks. You just move continuously, and you can hold the shutter down while you're shooting. This enables me to shoot portraits of people if they hold still, and then it only takes like 5 seconds to shoot them. You can even use a lot of cell phones have burst mode as well, where you can just move your cell phone horizontally in front of whoever you're shooting and shoot enough frames for a sequence to make a lenticular print. But you can see in the next videos, the first video shows what you get when you just view the images right out of the camera. This was done with that same slide bar in the previous video that's of a pitcher plant at Wave Hill. And this, so this doesn't really look 3D, and if you were to make a lenticular of that, it would look like crap. So in the second video, you see what it looks like when you try to take the pan out using After Effects, or I use combustion a lot, which is like a baby flame. It's a high-end, more high-end software, and it's for doing animation and special effects. So that's almost what you want, except it's still bumpy. You want to get the bumps out, and to do that, you use stabilization software, which you can find in After Effects or in Combustion, or you can manually do it in Photoshop, which is a big pain. I don't recommend it, but that's when I started out. That's how I was doing it. What you see here is that the pitcher plants are now very stable. They're not jiggling around, but the next step is then to crop the edges where you see the black bars, and to also set your convergence point. So in video 4, we see it pivoting when it plays. It looks as if the whole scene is kind of rotating through central point. Now, normally, the convergence point is set at the closest object to the camera when doing normal stereo photography. But with lenticular, it has a very limited amount of depth that you can actually show before it starts to get soft and blurry. Because when you look through a lenticular lens sheet, you're actually seeing more than 1 frame at a time in each eye. You're seeing kind of a blend of maybe 3 or 4 frames, and that's why it tends to look blurry or like a double image if the movement is too fast in the foreground and the background. So you want to balance that as best you can between the movement in the foreground and the background. Here are some examples of my work. On the right, you see it's a standard stereo pair, and on the left is the full sequence as an anaglyph, and then below that is the side-by-side view. Now, when I shoot my lenticulars, I get 40 or 50 images of each subject. So I have to organize that. If I put them all in one folder, then I have these huge numbers of images. So I then put each group of images into individual folders. And then I pick like 5 or 6 frames apart. I pick 2 frames and then put them side by side and throw them into Stereo Photo Maker and do a batch of alignments and align all of the day's shooting at one time, and then I make anaglyphs, and then I can get a preview of what they look like before I go through the process. Because going through all the work of making a lenticular for each one before I see it is a tremendous amount of work. So this way I can like weed out the bad ones and just pick the better, select before doing the work. So this one is a passion flower It's a vine leaf passion flower. These are all from the botanical gardens, and they are all from like the tropical plant section. And one of the things I do when I shoot these is I like to make the background go out of focus, because in this case I'm not using a tripod, and you can sort of see that when these things move, that they're not as smooth as when I use the slide bar and the tripod. These are all handheld cha-cha-chas, and I am towing in, so I'm like rotating around the plant as I'm doing it, the subject matter. So otherwise it would go completely out of frame when you're shooting this close up. And I also shoot with the longest lens possible so that the background can go out of focus, because you in order to maintain the depth on the subject matter, you have to just let the background go soft and out of focus. Otherwise, it would become very noticeable when you view the lenticular print that the background was moving too fast. But by letting it go soft, it doesn't as bothersome, and it adds more depth to the whole image. So this is a wax plant called the Hoya Loisiandru cyana, another tropical plant at the New York Botanical Gardens. Very beautiful, weird flower.
Did you have the name of the first one? Somebody asked in the chat.
Yeah, the first one is it's called a neotropical blueberry, and it's also like a South American tropical plant.
This one.
Yeah.
I'll just run through and do the anaglyphs for each.
It does look a little like a blueberry without the blue color. This is just a standard orchid that you can find almost anywhere, Home Depot or Trader Joe's. But
when you use your iPhone to shoot multiple images, how did you determine what would be the best amount of images to shoot? I know it's shooting very rapidly, but you must have come to some kind of conclusion after a trial and error, how you felt about how many you needed, or when you feel like you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish in terms of capturing it.
Usually it's by how far you want to move. Like if the subject is close up, you move maybe 2 feet or so and just keep shooting till you finish. If the subject is further away, you've got to move much further and even sometimes walk while you're doing it. And sometimes that burst mode, it doesn't work very well when you do that, especially if it's like if you're like in Governor's Island photographing Manhattan, for instance, you're going to take a shot, move maybe 3 feet, take another shot, move another 3 feet, take another shot, and that will give you enough depth, a hyper stereo effect. Whereas if it's a portrait or a flower, if it's a flower and you're this close, really close, you don't want to move very much. So basically it's like 2 or 3 seconds of movement, or maybe.
And how about the light metering? How does that affect you? Because obviously when you're moving it, that's changing a little, right?
Well, there are a lot of factors actually that, like when I'm shooting plants and flowers and stuff, you also have the problem of clouds moving. So your lighting can change during the shot. And when I'm working on the images, a lot of times I will have to recolor correct for changes in brightness, the sequence. So I'll animate the brightness to take that flashing out, because sometimes you will get different flashing of brightness from various sources of light changing.
How long did it take you, or do you have how long did it take you to get a feel for, like, I got it, like I want this shot, and now I know I'm confident that I actually got it? How long did it take you to develop that feeling?
Well, I always had some sense, because I was doing cha-chas long before I started doing lenticulars, and I always sort of guesstimated that, and then and it's really, you know, kind of arbitrary in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, there's definitely a correct way if you're making a feature film to get it just right for feature presentation, but for a lot of the work that I do, it doesn't have that strict requirement, and so I sort of wing it, and sometimes there's ways to cheat it. Like, for instance, I can shoot more than enough frames and then edit, and then when I print, I only use the frames I need for the particular size print and the particular lens sheet that I'm using. So each lens sheet's a little different in how many images you will need and so on.
So we had a question. Do you use burst mode on your iPhone? Have you ever found that to be a useful tool for doing this?
Yeah, that's the way I normally shoot. Like if I'm shooting a portrait or a plant or something, I just use the burst mode, and you can use the volume button. It's very nice. You just press the volume button as a trigger instead of having to, you know, poke the circle on the image. The volume button will work as a trigger. So you turn the camera upside down so that the volume's on top, and then it's like a normal camera. And the same thing with my Nikon. I set it to burst mode, and I shoot just, and that's an easy, fast way to do it.
Does burst mode, does that lock the light meter?
No.
Oh.
But most of the time the meter doesn't change that much. But what can happen is the focus can change and cause it to slow down. And so sometimes I will set the focus, turn the focus to manual, and then start shooting. And then I have to remember to turn it back to auto so that I refocus on the next flower or the next object. It's focusing. If you forget, it'll be out of focus for the next shot. But yeah, sometimes I turn off the focus just for that reason. But generally, if the exposure changes a little bit, I can fix it in post. So that's not that critical.
Just one question, one more, unless Jim got something from the chat.
Another.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there is one from the chat, but Bob McAfee's there's a broken plugin on Paul's site. I noticed that the other day, but you're looking into that, I guess.
My site was built with iWeb, and it only works on if you have a Macintosh. It really, I have to update it, and I'm sorry I haven't. But if you have a Mac, it should work. But if you use an iPhone or a tablet, it won't work because they decided to dump all their customers rather than upgrade their software.
Unless you guys got anything off the chat.
Well, I mean, the only other, it's really just more of a terminology question. We talked about this before. You're deliberately reducing your depth of field to get your background blurred, right? In other words, when you're shooting, you're kind of doing the opposite of what a lot of us 3D people do. You're actually going for a limited depth of field to basically optimize the way this is going to look as a lenticular, right?
It depends on the subject matter. If I'm shooting flowers and stuff, and which I want the depth to mainly be on the flower, then I reduce the depth of field so that the background goes soft. I'll even darken the background in some cases as well, so that you focus more on the subject matter. Same thing with portraits. If I'm shooting a portrait of someone and the background's too far away, then if I don't do that, then if I try to keep everything sharp, what will happen is that the portrait will look kind of like cardboard in front of another cardboard background, and then the quality of the 3D is minimized. So you want to maximize the three-dimensional depth on the person's face so that it looks volumetric, as opposed to looking like flat planes.
And you make these on your own printer? How do you do that? How do you reproduce them?
You could print them. My own printer is only 13 inches wide, and you cannot rotate the image. It has to be printed in only one direction. So the widest you can go is the width of the printer. So I use my printer for the smaller or medium format, and I have my friend Gene Tulchin, who's in New Jersey. He has a 2-foot wide 7900 Epson, and that does really beautiful work for the wider prints. Or I would go to a professional printer in the city and do it there. But you need to laminate these right away, because the paper shrinks, and the precision of the lenticular is within thousandths of an inch. So if you make a test print and check the correct pitch of the print, and then wait a day to laminate it, then the print will change size by shrinking from drying out, and then it won't match when you laminate.
And I just wanted to chime in. We're getting on chat. People are letting us know that on an old Mac, or actually up-to-date Macs, Firefox seems to handle your website correctly. So for those who are trying, see if you have or can get Firefox. Apparently that is the magic bullet for now.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. That was illuminating, to say the least. And it was a hard act to follow, man. I give you all the credit in the world. Single rocket launch. Okay, well, next. Thank you. So but that was very engaging. You did a very good job of explaining it, man. And it's very nice to it's generous of you to let us in on your process. I don't even want to ask how long it takes to go from idea to shot to actual holding something in front of you that you appreciate. That's got to be a tremendous amount of man hours and experience. So, but I thank you for sharing with us. That was great. And by the way,
thanks for having me.
Oh, to be continued. Absolutely to be continued.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now we're gonna. This guy's he's moving in with us basically. Jim McManus is moving in. He's literally every week we have, and we're glad to have him.
Thank you.
And
you
you
guys are fun to be with. What can I say?
Well, thank you.
Plus, my choices are limited, so.
Well, yeah, that figures out why we're so good to be around. Anyway, well, he's based out of Orlando, Florida. He's designed and built a wide variety of 3D camera rigs, and actually his work, when you can go back up to Niagara Falls, it's in Cave of the Winds Visitor Center up in Niagara Falls. While there may be some moments during this presentation that you don't fully understand the procedures or the jargon that Jim is explaining, but I believe you'll leave at least with a fundamental understanding of the 2D to 3D conversion process, because that's a long way to go. You're not going to do what he does, that's for certain. You'll think you can, but that's all right. You got to spend some time on this. So don't get confused when he's saying stuff. He's a good communicator, because we went through this already, but this is a really good beginning to understand the potential for conversions. He's been generous, very generous with his time, and in the after party you can ask him all the questions, because they're going to come up, I guarantee. But stifle yourself and wait till later, and he'll answer every question. He's been fantastic.
Yeah, feel free to put questions on chat. We're watching that.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest. Thank you.
Yeah, that's likely the best way. And then Jim Harp can bring them up. And in the meantime, well, hey, listen, did your wife get a shot outside, just out of curiosity?
We couldn't see this one. It was too cloudy. So we got about 50 miles of atmosphere between us and there. Normally, if I'm not working it, I get a real front seat if I'm working one. And if I'm not working it, we can see it right from the end of our dock. So yeah, this one didn't work out, but man, how cool was that? You
could hear it though, I get, right? You got to be able to. Could you?
No, you have to be a little closer than us to hear it. Within probably a dozen miles, really, to hear it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, cutting to the chase. And the other thing about 2D, and I'll just be brief before I introduce him, because you want me to shut up, and I know that already, but take it easy, all you guys. It's fascinating because, like Gordon now, who was our guest a few weeks ago, who's also an NYSA member, as he said so relevantly that there's a lot of 3D information in the 2D picture. Mm-hmm. And look at the clever stuff he was doing with the mirrors, but there is information. So it's not like a trick, because if you want to say 3D is a trick, it's really not. It's your brain's trick. It's
Exactly.
an evolution. So if you want to call it that, that's all right, but it's literally a very complicated calculation. So when you could stimulate that calculation by doing these conversions, it's as legitimate as anything else. There's nothing wrong with it at all, because as a matter of fact, I'll cut one more thing. My son, when I looked at my 3D projectors, my 3D monitors, and it has that 2D to 3D conversion, like, of course, anybody into 3D, we go, but you know what? My son, who's not deeply into the science, him and his friends enjoyed pressing that button. So who am I to say, hey, you shouldn't be having fun? Take this seriously. But anyway, on that great, way too long introduction, take it away. Take it away, Jim.
I was going to say, killing time toward another launch, maybe, or yeah. No, it's you hit it right on the head, John. I'm glad you brought that up. Conversions sort of get a bad rap. A lot of people think of them as normally very poorly done, and that's true. But it's like anything else. The amount of time you put into it will reflect the quality out the other end. So the amazing thing about conversions, if you think about it, we've all got treasure gold family photos that we want to save, things like that. They would be nice to have in 3D. And now, there is a way. But it goes beyond that. A lot of us are stereo photographers, and we would love to be able to fix a lot of errors in our 3D photography. We all have done cha-chas. We all have done hyper stereos, and they're loaded with sync errors, because you couldn't, just an error exists because you couldn't take the two pictures at the same time. So there's a lot of things that I'm going to touch on today that are ways to clean up and fix and even improve by adding content, maybe even from other pictures, from other like shots in the same set, into the favorite shot. It's like, oh, everything's great except for this one thing. Oh, now you can go in and actually kind of cut and paste and do some techniques I'll talk about. So what we'll do today is I want to show you some images first, and at the end I'm going to show you 3 simple tools that I use. Photoshop CS5, which it's nothing new, believe me. So if I'm able to do that, most of you guys can use some kind of image editor and get the same basic tools that I'm using. The 3 of them basically, and you got to kind of know how to select, and it would help to know how to mask and things like that, because this is all based on selecting. When you see a picture with, let's say, somebody in it, you have to be able to select around them. Now, there's some wonderful tools that help you do this automatically, but that's a subject for a whole nother workshop. And as is my anaglyph process. Now, you'll notice I don't have a 3D webcam. I actually am in 2D, but I do have a 3D shot behind me, and that's just something I cranked out in my conversion lab, we'll call it, very quickly, and I just basically used a combination of depth mapping to get me most of the way there, because this is mostly smooth surfaces, sort of, vanishing into the background, and then also some other techniques to pop out some things in relief. So if you want to think about my technique, I call it a storyboard technique, and it really boils down to 3, not only the 3 tools you use, coincidentally, I never thought about this, but it's sort of 3 phases. In the case of like this hallway, I lay it down, and then I pop up things, and then I fill them out in relief. So it's really just those sort of 3 basic things if you think about it like a storyboard, like a storybook, a pop-up storybook. So what I'm going to do now is, real quick, I'm going to just move over to get myself out of the detention block, move over to conversion command here, and there we go, much better. So again, I just converted this like in no time at all. And by the way, these are free backgrounds available from Disney right now. On the pandemic, they're making stuff available to people. And I was just like, I'll convert it into 3D. It took me like maybe 15 or 20 minutes or something like that, even to go back and fix the mistakes. So you can see though, again, I'm not in 3D, so I can't ever reach the chair. I'm like, I'm so close. But anyway, let me get back to it, and I'm going to screen share you guys with Photoshop and show you what I got going on here. In general, what I do is, and again, this is a topic for a whole nother workshop, but I have all my layers, all my images arranged in layers, stacked on top of one another. And then I use channel mixing filter, well, not actually filters, they're called adjustment layers in Photoshop. And what they are, there's these wonderful things that normally you have to like apply an effect to an image, but this lets you do it, but not permanently. So you can just turn it on and off, which is very cool. So I've sort of customized some anaglyph layers, which allow you to get, a pretty good headache-free anaglyph. Now this is a little severe because it's a plain background. You'll see a little ghosting. But as you see when I go along, there's going to be a lot of cases where normally you might expect to see some ghosting, but it's pretty ghost free. So what I want to do is share with you my very first, let's talk about just one method of conversion, and that's depth maps. We've all heard of them. They're popular now because of iPhones and portrait modes and things like that, and Facebook 3D photos. This is the very simplest depth map you could ever have. If you imagine a depth map as turning off all the color and detail in the world and just shining a flashlight out in front of you, and everything that's closer to you reflects bright, everything that's farther away has a lot less light to reflect, so it's darker. So I basically took this depth map and I used it to take this photo, which, and this was years ago. This tells you how long ago I attempted this very first depth map. It was post 9/11, but not too long after. And I used that depth map to tell Photoshop. And again, this is another sort of topic. If anybody wants to hit me up on how to do a displacement map in Photoshop, I'll clue you in. But to do the process here, I'm just going to show you the result, and that is that. So we went from 2D to 3D with just the simplest depth map in the world. And all we're doing is saying, if you think about this scene like a piece of paper, all I did was lay it backward, and then I bent it, I creased it at the bottom of the city, at the horizon line of the water, and then folded it back up toward you. So that's just two planes, very, very simple. That's about as simple as a depth map gets. But if you want to talk more advanced depth mapping, back in 2007 at the NSA convention up in Boise in Idaho, I took this shot looking around the hallway, and I was like, well, I'll try something a little tougher. And what I did was I ended up having to go back after failing a couple times at a depth map and draw some lines over the image, which helped me geometrically sort of figure out where to, and by the way, I'm drawing these depth maps with just a gradient tool. And a gradient tool is just simply something you say, I want to go from light to dark, from here to here, and you just draw a line from A to B, and it fills in like a fade, almost like a gradual, like it says, a gradient. And so that's the key to doing these depth maps. And what ended up happening was I get a map that looks something like, let me just turn that off, something like this, okay? And that's like 4 layers. If you took the 1 layer that I had in the first one, and I just did 4 of them, and I intersected them in Photoshop. Excuse me, I grab a sip of water. And the final result is this. Okay, so we've gone from this, the 2D shot, to this, very simply, very quickly. Now, if I wanted to, and if I spent any time, I would go in and pop out the lamps, pop out anything that you can, and recess the doors, but that would just, again, this is like anything else. The more time you put into it, the better off the results will be. Now, to talk about very quickly before we leave depth maps, there's also very much more complicated depth maps, including round ones, and that was fun. I have to give credit to a guy named Michael Beach, who wrote a series of books on tweaking the stereo window to do really creative things, and in this case, converting round objects using depth maps. And what I did was I basically used some of his math. And let me just show you, there's some scary math for you. It involved like figuring out how many slices I wanted to slice half of this sphere into, and the radius and the amount of shift per slice, and oh my gosh. So you end up with a depth map that looks something like this. But you can see it's a little, it's got some ridges to it, and you can smooth that out in Photoshop. You can go back and like blur that if you really wanted to get it smooth, but it doesn't make a huge difference, I find, because the end result, again, going from completely flat to this, okay, you get a little depth, but the great thing about a depth map is you can go back and say, okay, Photoshop, I want you to displace it by X amount more pixels, so let's get a little deeper, and then a little deeper than that, right? So now we're gone from that to that, and this is just a stock image of the moon. I can't claim credit to this one, obviously. There's a lot of photos in here that are mine. Most of them are, but this one is not. So I wish I could say I had that kind of optics to take that kind of image. So let's talk about a more challenging image when I quickly realized that, okay, depth maps weren't the end-all be-all, and that wasn't going to get me everywhere. And that was this image that I did for my Niagara Falls project. It's one of the very few things that I couldn't photograph because it doesn't exist anymore. This is Nikola Tesla's original power plant. It was called the Adams Power Station, and this is what ended up giving the world AC power over long distances for the very first time. And it was in operation for years and years and years, but it ended up getting torn down. It's almost all gone. And so I wanted to start with depth mapping. So if we zoom into one of those buildings, I go, okay, I'll just draw depth maps all over the building, right? And do different kind of, okay, that doesn't look too bad. But boy, when you start looking at the results in 3D, you quickly see the limits of depth mapping, like the right edge of that building. What happens is depth mapping will smear it a lot. So you end up having to go back and do a lot of cleanup with depth maps, especially if you're moving anything large amounts. So if we go back and look at the original photo, now I've converted it to 3D using, there's the 2D and there's the 3D. And by the way, if I didn't tell you guys already, which I don't think I did, just if you can, leave your anaglyph glasses on the whole time and crank your brightness up the whole way, because anaglyph really benefits from that. And hopefully my layers in Photoshop will remove the headache factor and they'll look better than what you're used to. And in Zoom, if you're not already in full screen mode, do that and hit fit to window and you'll be able to see these images a lot better. Because the great thing about anaglyphs is not only are they universal, but you can zoom in. So check this out. I can take this image, and this again is after I've spent a lot of time with it. I can zoom in and I can see a lot of detail and pan around and check out the guard at the gate and the fences and the chain link fences. And again, most of this was done with the 3 tools that I'm going to show you at the end of this after we look at a couple of examples of what you can do, and then we'll see how you can do that. Okay, so that is that. And by the way, I thought, well, that's a lot of empty sky, but the format of this, there was a paying customer, was 4:3, so I couldn't just crop it to, you know, widescreen, and I didn't want to stretch it and make it look funny. So I ended up adding a sky. And again, that's a very simple technique that, you learn more about in Photoshop with selecting and masking and tricks like that. Now so that one sort of started teaching me about, maybe I better go in and sort of do a little slicing and dicing, selecting and moving, whatever you want to call it. And this was another image that I couldn't take, which was guys in a power plant that we couldn't get access to. So I started with a basic depth map, and then we go here and you can see, okay, that gets me most of the way there. So a depth map can do some of the heavy lifting of like the smooth surfaces. Again, could compare 2D and 3D, 2D and 3D. Now, to get the rest of it, you can see the big generator up there is kind of crashing into the wall, which it wasn't in real life, is a lot more detail work going in and selecting and moving things aside. And if I zoom into the background here, now you can see that the generator opens, occupies its own space. That's what I wanted to say. And I just love the look of these 3 guys kind of standing in awe of all this giant machinery. So let's move on now to my method, which I sort of developed, and in general, we'll call it again the storybook method, the pop-up storybook method, whatever you want to call it. It can be used to, like I said, fix a lot of problems in hyperstereos and cha-chas, not just sync errors, but mainly can also be used to enhance your 3D photos. This was a shot, again, I took from my Niagara project from very far away with telephoto lenses, and it had virtually no depth in it. As a matter of fact, you can see just a couple of seagulls down, near the bottom in front of the boat. And that's really about all that gives you depth, So what I did was I started with a little depth map to help me out, and it would allow me to pop up the boat from the background. So I just laid down the background and popped up the boat. And then step 3 would be to fill in the details. So there it is, laid down and popped up, okay? And then I filled in some details, and I have to zoom in to see because there's a lot of small people. But in general, on this version, they're still pretty flat. And I had to go in, and this was just hours of selecting. Again, it depends on how much time you want to put into it. But the result is so much more fantastic. It makes it even look like I'd shot it with a hyper rig, which I had gotten as hyper as I could, but it wasn't very wide on that particular rig. So, and by the way, I had to add a couple seagulls, for a little pop through the window effect, just to, and also I had to make room for the title on the bottom of these. All of these happen to have titles with them. And this one was a shot for a friend of mine that was actually a guy that saw one of my exhibits and wanted to pay me to convert something for him personally, which was a shot of his hometown in France. And that was just, again, if you can imagine, I'm just going to show you, to speed things up, an A-B comparison of sort of before and after. So that's before and that's after. And again, think about it. I just laid down the landscape. I then selected like this, I separated, the foreground mountain from the city and the background mountain from each other and from the sky. And then I just started shifting things around. And you'll see how you do that with just a move tool, which is very, very easy. And every photo editor has a move tool for sure, in addition to the other 2. Real quickly, just a couple more examples. And that is, and nobody really thinks about this, but you can actually synthesize photos from scratch. One of the shots we had to get was a peregrine falcon, which I knew I would never see. It would be just a dot in the sky. So I went along and I started shooting down near Niagara Gorge. I just started shooting the cliff wall, and you can see it's very overexposed. It was very shadowy that day. And then I had to get rights to use a shot of a peregrine falcon, which I converted. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. I sort of, brought his wings out, poked his beak out a little bit, did a little bit of 3D magic, but I didn't have to go too nuts because he's still pretty small in the screen. And then finally I added in a little 3D sky and pushed it back for a final image. That beats that by quite a bit. So then you can not only enhance your own 3D pairs, but there's also, of course, the lovely pair repair. And thank you, Jim Harp, for mentioning this a couple days ago, because this image is great in side by side. But again, this presentation is only anaglyph because of my Photoshop process. So it ghosted pretty bad. So I went back and I told the Empire to turn on the force field a little bit, and so there we go. We crank up the force field, and now we can go in and see, oh yeah, there's a lot of wonderful detail. All these troopers behaved, except for this guy right in the foreground. He's got a sync error. Why? Because this was a hyper stereo shot. So what I did was, you actually have two choices in here. I went in and I basically just cut and pasted the head from one image to the other image to get this pair. And then you can do the opposite, take the other head and cut and paste it back over the first image to get this pair. So if you think about it, you actually can get two images from a previously, not a ruined shot, but it's not the best because that guy moved. So if we go from that to two possible shots, and again, you just have a lot more options. Oops, sorry about that. Never want to hit you with a white screen. And I just like the way even the reflections on the floor pop out in this one. So the final thing I want to show you, or let's see, two more final things before, is that right? Is that you can give your images more depth. Now, we've all wanted to say, this stereo image is great, but it just, again, like the boat, just doesn't have enough depth. So this is another example where I went in without a depth map, and I'm just using the tools that I'm going to show you, which is simply shifting and moving and scaling. I stretched the landscape back. It went from pretty flat with a 3D bird to actually, got some depth in there. And then I went in, and again, using that storybook sort of technique, I popped the people up because they were very flat. There's the original. And there they are there. So that, now you can actually tell, okay, this was shot with a 3D camera, because otherwise, what's the point if you're not going to make it kind of obvious that it's done in 3D? And this is another great example of that. This was done with drone photography that is done of Goat Island, and I couldn't get a 3D image of it. So we did conversion, and I just laid the landscape down. And then I actually deepened the ravine, the Niagara Gorge there with, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, just with the tools, the basic tools. And then I went in and went nuts because I had some time and actually raised up the trees and really did some stuff. But a better example is, let's say you did a shot like this and you're shooting across, in this case, a river, and you go, man, that would have been better if I got some depth. But because I was shooting with long lenses, I couldn't just get right down at the water's edge, because that would be one trick with a wide angle lens. What I can do is actually grab the bottom edge of one of my images and slide it over so that it gets you this. So I didn't even change anything other than to grab the bottom edge of one image, slide it over, and now it looks like it was shot with more of a hyper lens spacing. So you can just do a lot of tricks like that. And yeah, I add birds at the client's request. Make it a little, always add birds and add people. That was one of the common things. Now, one thing that I never thought I would be doing was adding less depth. This is the only sort of headache image. Let me go to the post-converted image. So I actually had shot this particular flower, which was only in bloom a very short amount of time. And what we ended up doing, because I didn't have a macro rig with me that day, I had to go back and deconvert it, because the original looked like this. And it was like, ooh, hard to fuse. So I actually kind of took a few elements from that shot and then took a few elements from the other shot and created this hybrid version, which, was a little flatter than maybe I would have liked to begin with. But again, I could, with the time that I could spend on it now, the artist is never done with their own work, including something like this. This shot of fish, if you see down at the bottom, they didn't want any rocks in the aquarium to show because it looks phony. So they said, can you do something about that? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll figure out how, I guess. So I had to go in 3D and skin this over with algae covered rocks from a different shot. But you can do stuff like that. Again, you have to get good at selecting. So I had to select the fish to make sure I wasn't pasting over him, but make sure I was pasting over the rocks, right? So, you know, with a little Photoshop knowledge, another example, you guys have seen the slideshow, have seen me replace flowers that weren't there because, again, the client was like, sorry, these things aren't in bloom, but we flew you up from Orlando to Buffalo and we can't do anything about it. So fix it. Okay, sure. No problem. So also adding people, again, is a very common thing. This was way zoomed in. This is a crop from a wider shot where I basically just had to add a bunch of people to the shot to make it look a little more populated. And I'm going to, before we get to the tools, I think, yeah, that's it. Let me open up this tool set, and I want to show you guys how you can do some of this for yourself, okay? So let's start with the simplest thing in the world. I promised you 3 tools, and this is the first one, a move tool. The move tool simply allows you to grab things and move them around. So if I literally just, I know you can't see my entire Photoshop desktop. You can see the main screen, but that gets you the point, because what I'm gonna do is I just basically grab my move tool and I'm gonna slide one half of my text one way or the other way. Now you can see it kind of recedes too far into the background because why? I haven't done anything to the background yet. So what I can do is actually grab instead, I'm going to grab my background layer. Now I know this only works with photos that are on different layers, but I'm going to tell you how you deal with that in just a second when everything's sandwiched together like in a regular photo. So again, I just slid my background layer back a little bit. It went from flat to recessed, just like that, okay? And then you can go play with, and again, this is sort of like the bird shot, the falcon shot. I'm just basically, you know, sliding things back and forth, just simply sliding them. And I'm only doing one of the images. Notice, whoops, I went out of sync vertically. You never want to move things vertically. That's the only golden rule in conversions, is never move things around vertically. Now you can see that with move, you're in danger of doing that. So what you want to do is probably, if you're moving things back and forth, you hold down the shift key, and that helps you lock it into place. Now, let's talk about the second tool, which is the scale tool. Now scale is actually in Photoshop, it's in the edit menu and it's under transform. So I call it a tool, I don't know what they call it, but it's a transforming tool, we'll call it. And scale allows you to do nifty things like, I'm just gonna go to my edit menu, I've got that text layer selected, I'm gonna go edit, transform, scale. What scale allows you to do is move things back and forth like this so that you can actually see the side of one image. One side stays attached and the other side is free to come out or recess, okay? Now again, that's something you can do with the background. I could jump over to my background layer and just go, oh, okay, let's say this would be good for like a wall. You've got a picture of a wall or a hallway and there's something sticking out of the hallway and you wanna be able to actually move the, let me just grab this other layer here, sorry about that. And you want to be able to make something poke out from the hallway itself. So let's just pretend that this grass, I know the background is grass, but let's pretend it's a, oops, I went the wrong way. I just grabbed one edge of it and now I'm going the other way. And you can see how now it's got some depth. So now I can go back to my scale layer, the text layer, and move it around if I want, you know, just basically shift and move and do all that fun stuff. And make it attached to the other layer. And again, you have full control over, only if you're working in this sort of method of sandwiching elements on top of each other, you have you know, control over this. Now, in a minute, we're gonna bring all 3 tools together, but let me just turn that tool off for a second and show you the final of the 3 tools, which is the perspective tool. Now, why did I choose these 3 tools? Well, the reason is, I'll leave you on a 3D image just for a split second. The reason I chose these 3 tools, we've seen it move. You could move vertically, but you don't want to. Scale, you can also move vertically, but you don't want to. So you can only grab the sides of your scale tool and move it sideways. On your perspective tool, you can only grab the bottom and top of your image and move them sideways as well, right? You never want to move up and down. So anything you grab, you're only moving sideways. And let me show you what I mean. I've grabbed my text layer. I'm just going to go to perspective here. And in this case, I'm going to grab the top and make it pretend like it's just poking out a little bit. And what am I doing? I'm pulling it to the left side in this case because I'm moving the right layer. So if I move it to the opposite direction, it comes toward you. If you move it backward, it recedes into the background, but I don't want to do that because I haven't moved the background yet. So this is very common with backgrounds. I would say 3/4 of everything you shoot, the background is, you see the ground. So you're basically going to end up doing what I'm doing, which is just selecting the background, the ground itself, selecting the background layer, using a perspective shift, and I'm just going to drag the top of it. Now, what do I want to do? In this case, I don't want to violate the window, so I'm not going to bring the bottom forward. I'm going to make the top go backward by shifting it to the right, okay? Now, if you can see what I did there, we went from completely flat background to it's got some depth now, right? And I can go and I can play with the text all I want, and of course, move that around and do its own perspective shifts and all that fun stuff. And so what do you have when you bring it all together? Well, you end up using all 3 of these tools and sort of going back and forth between them. So just real simply, I'm going to move the background layer just to give us a little bit of 3D space to work with, because I don't want to collide with it with my text. And in a minute, we'll see what to do when these images can't be separated like what they are now, because that's what you'll encounter most of the time. So you can end up doing a combination. In the same move, I can go, okay, I want to scale this word a little bit to recess the left side a little bit. And then I'm going to jump over, and I haven't even hit enter and committed to that yet. I'm going to jump over to the perspective transformation, and I'm going to drag the top a little bit to make it look like it lays back. And the corner of that C, I'm going to make intersect with the grass right there. And then I'm going to go nuts and maybe do a cool thing on the scale thing. I know there's like other key options that you can hold down, like the option key. And those are, again, things for another workshop. But you can like do the option key and spin this thing around and do crazy stuff. So you're going to end up using all 3 of these tools and sort of going back and forth. And what I usually do, my golden rule, is to pick, let's say we're starting with a 2D image. And we want to be able to, I'm going to switch over to our first 2D image that I can't separate the layers. And I'm going to wrap it up here in just a few minutes, but it's going to be like, ta-da, and hopefully you guys will get it and be able to go and try stuff. So when you're looking at a 2D layer, again, what I usually do is I start, by just laying down the background. And in this case, again, I can't separate the text from that. So let me just open my file over here. And I'm going to say, all right, how do we do that? We're going to do a perspective shift because we need to grab the top or bottom edge. So I'm going to grab the top edge, lay it down, okay, about like there, roughly. All right. Now, I do a lot of, and I'm going to apply that transformation. I do a lot of anaglyph work because, again, it offers options, advantages of being able to zoom. And one thing is just being able to close one eye and see where I need to make a selection. So if I want to grab what do we need to make this move stand up is grab the top edge of the move and bring it back over to the left. So I'm going to make a really rough selection. And all I did was grab my lasso tool, which is like the simplest thing. Well, not the simplest thing in the world. Actually, I could have grabbed the rectangle tool and that would have been a little simpler. I'm just going to grab a lasso around here. And it's not even very tight. If you're doing real perfect selections, you really want to go in there and fine tune and fix things up. But for the purposes today, I'm just basically going to do a real sloppy thing, but I am going to go back and I'm going to blur the edge so it doesn't really show that bad. Because right now it's a very sharp edge. And I'm going to go ahead and just like, yeah, that's pretty blurry. Let me back that off a little bit. Yeah, somewhere in there, somewhere in that neighborhood is good. Okay, now I still have that layer selected, but because I've got the ring drawn around it, I can actually go in and say, all right, I'm going to do my own perspective shift on that part of the photo. So I just went, again, transform perspective. I'm going to grab the top edge, and let's go back a little bit to the left. Now you notice because I was real sloppy and I just grabbed a bunch of grass around move, that you see that come with it. So this is why if you really wanted to be crafty and get good at selections, you're going to end up doing something like all the other magic tricks that I don't have time to tell you about today, like the magic wand tool, which is a wonderful thing that you can just literally, based on color and contrast, it'll pick stuff out for you. So now you can actually go in and go, okay, now that I've got it more accurately selected, let's do a perspective shift and just bring the text forward, right? So I just grab the top of the text. But you noticed it leaves a little bit behind, just a little bit behind you. So what you can do in this case is like basically, let me see if I can do this. I know this is probably, it's not even an advanced technique, but I want you guys to see what's possible. And I'm basically gonna, if you're moving something to the left, you wanna sort of add a little slop image over to the right to bring it with it. So I'm just gonna like extend my selection a little bit to the right to include all that stuff. And I don't even know how this is gonna work out. I'm just as curious as you guys. And so let's try that same transformation now. And again, I'm just gonna grab the top edge, transform perspective, grab the top edge, move it back. And again, there's less grass to clean up. You know, you can see that the advantage is by leaving a little extra on the right, you see if I move too far, we're gonna see the E from the original move. Now I know that's extreme, but I wanted to like, you can leave just enough to sort of cover up the remainder, and that gets you 90% of the way there. And then your cleanup isn't so bad when you go back and you have to go in and touch up, because believe me, that's where it's, you know, the devil's in the details. And if you spend forever, you know, doing that kind of stuff, you're gonna drive yourself nuts. So the move tool, that by the way, you can do scale, perspective, the same thing. And if you ever run into a situation where you move something too far and you find that you left a hole, you're gonna find that you leave a lot of holes sometimes in your 3D image. What you can do, this is kind of an advanced trick, and email me later if you want to get some of these tips, is you can put a copy layer underneath the original layer, and that will fill in the hole for you. So my final image I want to show you guys, now that you've seen the 3 tools, again, I'm going to just reiterate them for you. Move, shift them back and forth, and the whole thing comes forward or backwards. You're not twisting it or doing anything weird. The scale tool, you're just grabbing one end, one left or right side, and stretching it back or forth, and that means one end is going to come toward you, and you can like leave one end anchored at the wall or the ground or whatever you want to do. And then perspective finally lets you anchor the top or bottom, and you shift the other one and bring it again forward or backward. Everything's about bringing it forward or backward. So it just depends on where you grab the box, top and bottom or left and right. Scale is left and right. This is top and bottom. My final image is my most difficult conversion. I just wanted to show you guys a brief summary of what you can do. And some of you saw this last year at NSA. I piped it in the middle of one of the shows. And this really sort of brought it all together for me. This was, again, that guy that paid me to do his ancestral hometown in France. He wanted to do his childhood hometown in Flushing, New York. Now, coincidentally, by the way, this is called Flushing Meadows. And this is where 3D polarized projection was born. Back in 1939, there was a World's Fair there. And 25 years later, they repeated it and had one in 1964. Well, in 39, Polaroid premiered polarized projection. So we can thank them for the birth of that in this very location. So I looked at this image and I'm like, okay, knowing what we know now, well, it's a little too detailed to bother with a depth map. So I'm just not going to bother with a depth map. I'm going to start by laying it down like I talked about with you guys. So basically, I'm just going to turn off the layers here one at a time and show you most of the inner workings of the basic process. I'm not going to do all the selecting, but I want to show you, okay, here's the flat image, and then let's peel back the layers of the onion, as it were. I laid it down with one move. What did I do? I grabbed the right image. You know why I choose the right image? Because when I go back in hindsight, I always know which one I messed with, because I know which one I left alone. So the left one is always like a copy of the original, and then the right one was always the one I made right. And occasionally you'll need to jump over and adjust something on the left side, but you should always save a copy if you do, in case you need to grab that little piece. So again, real quick, I'm going to go down here. We went from completely 2D to, all right, I laid the landscape back enough, I thought. Not, you know, you don't want to go too nuts and make it seem like you're a giant looking at a model railroad set. And then the second thing I did was I made the buildings. You'll notice those towers, those are from the end of Men in Black, also coincidentally. But I made those, and the light posts and a couple other things pop up. All the buildings in the background, what did I do? I selected them and I perspective shifted them from the top over to the left, I'm sorry, to the right. I'm sorry, I'm working on the right image. You'll figure it out. I shift them to the opposite of the image that you're working on to make it come forward. So I moved them to the left. And then the next layer I did, the next big thing was like, all right, how do we tackle this globe? Because man, that's gonna be a monster. That's way more difficult than anything I've ever done. So first I had to sort of select it and temporarily get rid of the rings. So then I popped it up. What do? We lay it down, we pop it up. Okay, so basically that's laid down, that's popped up, right? But it's still 2D, it's still flat. And then the third basic step, remember, lay it down, pop it up, fill it out. So using some of that moon math from way back, I filled out the sphere to pop out towards us. Okay, I'm gonna go in for a close-up in just a second. So we went from flat to at least round on the front, but guess what? That thing's see-through. So now next came a lot of selecting, and this was again using different selecting tools and just a lot of painstaking effort, a lot of labor. I went in and I selected by hand all the meshy wire bits that shouldn't be on the front of the globe, but should be in the back of the globe. So guess what? I did the opposite map. I made a depth map in reverse. I'd never done this before. I just theorized that I could make a depth map in reverse by doing what I did to pop the front out twice in reverse, the other way, basically negative values for all that math. So what we did now is, this is the hardest thing. Now everybody get your glasses on if you took them off, but the globe is still, it's round, but it's still not right. And now, oh wait, I had to erase some trees. Sorry, there were some details missing, but let's just skip that one for now. Now we finally get to see the globe see-through. Okay, so we went from 3D looking, you know, popping out toward me like a sphere to an actual see-through globe. And I challenge you to sort of tell, you know, if that wasn't taken in 3D. I don't want to zoom in too far, but you can see even people over here on the sidewalks that I ended up enlarging. I'm sorry, I ended up enlarging so I could see what I was doing and zooming in. And what did I do? I perspective shift the top of them. I just made a little loop around them and I perspective shift them over. But the globe was the real killer. So that's what, again, we went from, I'll just go over the basic steps here. We went from, oops, flat, you know, laid down, but still flat, popped up, but still flat, popped up and round with some depth mapping help, and I manually popped up the rest of the trees. And then finally see-through, where you can really see what's doing with the globe. So that in a nutshell. Oh, and let me show you the one last touch I did, and this is what I'll finish with. And I thank you guys for your patience. Again, hit me up. I'll show you my email here in just a second, or you can hit me in chat. Was I just did a sky conversion because the sky was very bland and plain. And I just, you know, it's like, why not now, you know? So it's, you run into the problem of like, okay, where do you stop messing with your own images, you know? So, and here finally is my email. And I really appreciate you guys bearing with us today, and also the delay for the launch, because that was so cool. And I love these meetings, and I hope they just stay to be, continue to be regular. So thank you, guys.
Jim, can I jump in with a question?
Who's going to jump in there?
Yeah, okay.
No, go ahead, please. No, Jim, go ahead, please.
Well, we've been kind of discussing this on chat. My recollection